from this Chinese virus. And yet at the same time, I understand that there are ways of assembling via TV, on the internet, and in other ways with other saints, even though we may not be in their physical presence. And it appears that perhaps we will be making use of some of those means in the near future. We'll simply have to wait and see what is the case when the time comes. You know, there's very seldom a time when I preach a lesson that I enjoy. Now, when I say enjoy, that I'm fascinated with from the standpoint of my own personal study and the possibilities of good that I see coming from a particular lesson, very seldom is there ever a time when I don't look back and I think to myself, well, that point never occurred to me. Or why didn't I say this? Why didn't this point come to the surface when I was looking at this the first time? And this is the case with regard to the lesson that I tried to deliver last Sunday night. Now, I had said that my intention, the Lord willing, was that I would put the last 2 points before you on the next Sunday evening, and since we're not assembling on Sunday evenings as of now, I wanted to go ahead and deal with these 2 points. But first, going back to a couple of the things that I dealt with last time, and I'll not take a long time to thoroughly analyze everything that we said, but I did want to go back just for a moment and emphasize some points that may need greater emphasis than I gave it in that first presentation. First of all, we were talking about the most difficult word to say. The most difficult word to say. And I teased you a little bit with anti-disestablishmentarianism, which was one of the longest words, other than a few scientific terms that I've seen that are even longer. But that is a long word. But the hardest word to say, and I can say this from personal experience as well as from my study, is the word no. Amen. And I want to tell you from my own life, as I look back over the life that I've lived thus far, much of what I have done and failed to do, but much of what I have done that I now regret, that I wish I had not done, resulted from my inability or my unwillingness to say no. No, absolutely not. It's a hard word sometimes for us to say. But here's something that I missed. In looking at the text in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where we're told that no temptation has taken you but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted beyond what you're able to bear, but will also with the temptation make a way to escape. God's not going to tempt you to do something that is bad, something that is wrong, but God is faithful, and I didn't emphasize that as I should have, and I don't want to miss this opportunity. God is faithful. He knows temptation is coming. And God is faithful, that carries the idea of consistency, and a God who keeps His promise, has made this promise, that with every temptation that comes, He will provide a way to escape. But now here's the problem. As I look back over the things that I'm aware of, and there are multiple things I'm not aware of that I've done that are in violation of God's will, it occurs to me that in each and every one of those that I still can recognize, there was a failure on my part to look for that way of escape. Or it may be that I just didn't want to take that way of escape. I don't know if you've ever been involved in a hot argument before. I've never been involved in an argument with any of you before, but I have on occasion been involved in arguments with people when I became angry. They may have become angry first, and I saw that as an excuse for me to exhibit anger also, and I was wrong. I should have just said, no. I'm not going there. I'm not going to do that. And I know that what James had to say in James chapter 1, there's a whole section there beginning with verse 12. He makes it clear that the individual who is drawn away by his own desires and enticed, well, the result of his sin is his fault. He is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed. And in verse 15, James says this, then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. He uses the picture of childbirth, conception and childbirth, to say, this is how sin comes into your life. Rather than say no, you let that interaction occur that you know you should be avoiding, and as a result of it, a conception occurs, and then finally it gives birth to sin, all of which could have been avoided if you had looked for that way to escape. I heard a man at a youth rally one time, and I'm sorry that I don't remember who it was. I want to attribute this to Jimmy Allen. He said a lot of things that I needed to hear back when I was a teenager, but it may have not been him. But I heard one man say at a youth rally, when he was speaking at the youth rally, he said, young ladies, when you go out on a date with that young man, he said, one thing that you can do to try and stay safe and to remain pure is, if you're riding in the front seat with him, put a Bible between you and him. And if you decide, or if he decides to do something which is inappropriate and wrong in the sight of God, he's going to have to physically, or you're going to have to physically move the Bible, and you're going to violate what it says if you do not keep your actions pure. I don't think we've got any teenagers here, but that's just a rule that whether or not it's dating, or whatever the situation is, we need to stand by God's Word. Now, I pointed out last week that it's also difficult sometimes to say no to those who praise you, to people you like. Everybody likes to have the approval of others. I don't care who you are. All of us would rather have the approval rather than the disapproval of the people we're around. Have you ever given in to doing something that wouldn't necessarily in and of itself be wrong, but something that you know you shouldn't do because it shouldn't have priority, and it's going to take time from the things you should be doing, and you finally just say yes because I just can't say no to that sweet person? Now, that's a good attitude. I'm glad you're thinking that way. There are many wonderful people in our lives, but when it comes down to setting our priorities, whether or not we're going to do what God says to do, we need to remember what Paul said, do I now persuade God or men? For if I yet please men, I should not be the servant of Christ. Galatians chapter 1 and verse 10. And so sometimes it's necessary to make that extremely clear in our actions. A third point, one that I didn't have time to get to last week. It is difficult to say no repeatedly. It is difficult to say no repeatedly. That's why we need to be careful, and we, those of us who maybe have children and grandchildren and have some contact with young people in our lives, that's why we need to remind them of the need for keeping the right kind of company. Keeping the right kind of company. Because you may be out with the guys, or your young person may be out with the guys and say no, and we're so proud of him, but if he's out with them enough and they repeat the offer enough times, it's difficult to keep on saying no. It's difficult just to say no many times, but to keep on saying no. I went back, and I'll not read all of this. It's quite a lengthy reading from Judges. In Judges chapter 16 primarily, we're told about that fellow Samson. He was a rounder. Now, I don't know what the dictionary definition of a rounder is, but he was one. He was a rounder. He did a lot of stuff wrong. As a matter of fact, most of what's listed that he did was wrong. And so, what got him into trouble? Well, first of all, his morals weren't very high. He became involved with a woman who was essentially a prostitute. Later on, he became involved with a Philistine woman, Delilah. He shouldn't have been involved with her, shouldn't have ever trusted her, shouldn't have ever had the pleasure with her that he was not authorized to have. And in Judges chapter 16, there's this strange story. It's strange to me because she was told, we'll give you 11,000 pieces of money, a lot of money, if you will find out what the secret of his strength is. We've tried to get him several times and we can't overcome him. We thought we were going to one time, and he ripped off the gates of the walled city, bar and all, and carried it to the top of a hill. We didn't know what to do because we couldn't get it back down. And so what's the secret? See if you can get it from him. We'll give you a load of money if you can find out. So she asked him, she made love to him, and she asked him, honey, what's the secret of your strength? Tell me. I won't tell a soul. And he began to trust her, maybe just a little, but not completely, and so he told a lie. He said no, but in doing so, he told a lie. He said, you know, if they bind me with wet bowstrings, I won't be able to break that. There's the secret. Well, how smart was he? He woke up, she had tried to bind him with wet bowstrings, and he broke them, of course, as if it were just spider web, and had no problem with it at all. But did it sink into his head and into his heart? This woman really can't be trusted. Why did she do that? Then later on, please, you're mocking me. You say you love me, and if you really love me, you tell me what the secret of your strength is. He said, well, here it is. If they bind me with ropes that have never been used, they always take ropes that have been used before. They bind me with brand new ropes, never been used, I'll not be able to escape. Well, same scenario. She wakes up and wakes him up. Says, the Philistines are upon you. The Philistines are upon you. And of course, he breaks those as if they were threads. Just scraps of threads. And again, he's having some fun. But how smart is he not to figure out this woman is up to no good? So she says again, well, what's the secret of your strength? He says, you see these locks of hair? Then weave those into a weave. Put those into a weave. Put those into this thing that you plait with, and I won't be able to escape from that. Well, the story is the same. He escapes with no trouble at all. And finally, she wears him down. And I found an interesting expression here in Judges chapter 16. He said, I am vexed to death. Now that word vexed, if I were translating this into current vernacular, I would say nagged. When does asking become nagging? That's a good discussion. And when we get back to Wednesday nights, Larry, I want you to head up that discussion as when does asking become nagging? Well, he said, you're just vexing me to death. And so finally he gives in and he pays for it. So it's hard to say no repeatedly. Now, the flip side of that, asking someone something over and over and over, let me ask you something. When do you stop praying for your wayward child? You just keep on asking, don't you? Of course. Now, Jesus told a story in Luke chapter 18 about a judge that he didn't care about God, had no love for God, had no regard for men. But he said there was this particular widow who had been wronged, and she just kept going back to the judge and say, hey, you need to make things right for me. I've been wronged. And because of her persistence, not because he cared one way or the other, but because she became so aggravating, finally he gave in and he made things right. Now, he's saying God, on the other hand, he loves you and he's a God of justice. So certainly if you don't get what you need the first time, or what you think you need and what you desire, keep on asking. He'll not respond simply because you worried him to death about it, but because he loves you. And so keep on asking. You know, that story in Luke chapter 15 about the wayward son who left his home, lived in a way that he had been trained not to live, and wasted his money, all of his inheritance, in riotous living. You know, after he was gone for a while, don't you think his daddy probably just quit praying for him and quit watching for him? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, we're told in the story that when that father saw his son coming a great distance off, where was that daddy? He was out somewhere watching, wasn't he? Somebody said he was on the porch watching for that boy to come home. He never had stopped asking. And sure enough, because of his persistence, and because there was planted within that boy's heart a seed of what is right and righteous, the situation turns out to be a blessing. Now, I want to deal with a final point this morning on this topic. It is difficult to say no to that which appears to be urgent. That which appears to be urgent. And here's the problem. You see, it depends upon my perspective as to what I think is really important and what's really urgent, what really needs to be done right now, and what doesn't. Depends on your perspective. And so I need to keep my perspectives on a spiritual level and think in these terms. What is truly important spiritually? Someone once made this statement. I'm not sure that I agree with this. I'm just repeating someone. Someone once said, the things that are truly urgent, the only things that are truly urgent, are those things that will matter 100 years from now. Now, there's some wisdom in that, but I'm not sure I entirely agree. But I would agree that spiritual matters, which will matter 1,000 years from today, 1,000,000 years from today, and in all eternity, spiritual matters ought to have priority over any material and physical matters. And so, what ought to be the most urgent thing? What should demand my attention? Those things that have spiritual consequences. Now, you don't have to be old and wise. You don't have to be old at all, but you do need to be wise and take God's will into consideration, as did good King Josiah. You know, that's a rare thing when we can say good king, referring back to the kings during the divided kingdom, because there weren't many. There weren't any in the northern kingdom. But in the kingdom of Judah, good King Josiah, the king of Judah. Here's a story about him. This is amazing. Reading from 2 Chronicles 34. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. And he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right hand nor to the left. 8 years old, but he had the judgment to look and see the wise decisions that had been made before his time. And he said, that's what I want to do. And he refused to turn to the left nor to the right. What does that mean? He refused to get distracted. You know, when they put blinders on a horse or on a mule, that's to keep the mule or the horse from being distracted, because he sees all around him, not just in front of him. So they put blinders on him so that he's not distracted by things around him. That's what we need to do. Put on some spiritual blinders to the world, becoming blind to the world and its enticements, so that we can see what really is important. Now listen to this. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young. Now listen to this. He did until he was like 16, that which was right in the sight of God. And then when he was 20 years old, he had the courage to do something extra special and spectacular. And here's what we're told. They broke down the altars of the Baals. I used to say Baals, but I'm told that correctly it is pronounced Baals, in his presence. And the incense altars which were above them he cut down, and the wooden images and the carved images and the molded images he broke in pieces and made dust of them, and scattered it on the graves of those who sacrificed to them. Started reigning when he was 18, taking brave actions when he was 16, and shining like a star by the time he was 20. How did God use such a young man? We don't have a draft anymore, but if we did, do you think they would draft people my age? They don't want people my age. They want people who are still young and exuberant, who have courage. You know, at my age, if my sergeant or first lieutenant says to me, I want you to charge up that hill right there. There's a machine gun doing a lot of damage up there, and I want you to charge that hill, I'd say, well, thank you, no disrespect intended, but I'd just as soon stay here behind this big rock. But you take those 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they charge up the hill. That's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of man Josiah was. And he broke all these things into pieces, scattered it on the graves of those who sacrificed to them. And here he was, still just a young man, maybe 20 years old. He also burned the bones of the priests on their altars and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so he did in the cities of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and all around with axes. When he had broken down the altars and the wooden images, had beaten to the carved images into powder, and cut down all the incense altars throughout the land of Israel, then he returned to Jerusalem. Now he says the job's done. Now I've done what God wanted me to do. How do you do that? God used this young man because this young man remembered what truly mattered in his life. And that was that he was king. And he needed to have the approval of God and do what his faithful forefather had done and say no to the issues of the day. It was an enticing thing to take part in idolatry. It involved sexual immorality. It involved the indulgence of the senses. There was a lot of appeal to it, to the physical person. But he said no, 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 no. He was able to use that word and to use it in the right way. So, what do we learn? Remembering what really matters in life. That's going to help us say no to the issues that only appear to be urgent, and to say yes to those things that truly are urgent, those things that matter spiritually and that will matter in eternity. You know, the Lord has invited all to respond to His love in loving obedience to be saved. And the devil's going to keep telling people. He tells people now, and he's going to keep on telling them, wait a while, you've got plenty of time. You've got plenty of time to give to God. You sowing your wild oats, you can continue doing your own thing. You're still young. But say no to the devil. No, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to be God's man. I'm going to be God's woman right now. And hopefully one day I'll be forever with my Father in heaven. That's the lesson for today, and if there's any way in which you need to respond to the love that God has offered through His loving invitation, won't you come now as we stand and sing?